Welcome to Part 3 of Murderous Lies. Visit brooksaudiobooks.com for an awesome collection of unique, full-length audiobooks. And be sure to subscribe to be notified when new books are released. Chapter 9. The Height of the Murderer. Saturday, May 15, 5 p.m. When we got to Clark's house, a patrolman leaning lazily against the iron fence suddenly straightened up and saluted. He looked at Quentin and me with a mix of hope and suspicion, probably thinking we were potential suspects being brought in for the district attorney's questioning. We were welcomed by one of the officers from the Homicide Bureau who had been at the house that morning. Leighton gave him a nod of recognition. "Everything going all right?" he asked. "Sure," the officer replied with a friendly tone. "The old lady's as sweet as can be, and a fantastic cook." "We want some privacy for a bit, sniffin'," Leighton said, as we stepped into the living room. "It's snitkin', not sniffin'," Quentin chimed in once the door was closed. "Great memory," Leighton muttered, sounding annoyed. "A failing of mine," Quentin replied. "I take it you're one of those rare types who can remember a face but forgets names, right?" But Leighton wasn't in the mood for teasing. "Now that you've dragged me out here, what's the plan?" He waved dismissively and sank into a chair like he was surrendering to some great burden. The living room looked much as it had before, except it was now neatly arranged. The shades were raised, allowing plenty of late afternoon sunlight to flood the space. The room's lavish decor seemed even more overwhelming in the brightness. Quentin glanced around and shivered. "I'm tempted to turn back," he drawled. "It's a perfect case of justifiable homicide committed by an outraged interior decorator." "My dear aesthete," Leighton said impatiently, "please set aside your artistic biases and tackle the problem at hand. Of course," he added with a mischievous grin, "if you're worried about the outcome, you're free to leave and keep your delightful theories untouched." "And let you send an innocent girl to the gallows," Quentin exclaimed, feigning outrage. "Goodness, good manners alone prevent me from withdrawing. May I never find myself lamenting, like Prince Henry, that, to my disgrace, I have strayed from the path of chivalry." Leighton clenched his jaw and shot Quentin an intense glare. "I'm starting to think you might be onto something with your theory, that every man harbors a motive for murder." Quentin grinned, clearly pleased. "Well, since you're beginning to see things my way, would it be all right if I sent Mr. Snitkin on a little errand?" Leighton let out an exasperated sigh and shrugged. "I'll smoke during the opera if it doesn't interfere with your performance." Quentin walked to the door and called for Snitkin. "Hey, would you mind heading over to Mrs. Platz's and borrowing a long tape measure and a ball of string? The district attorney needs them," he added with an exaggerated bow toward Leighton. "I can't hope that you're not planning to hang yourself, can I?" Leighton joked. Quentin looked at him with disapproval. "Allow me," he said sweetly, "to point you to Othello. How poor are they that lack patience? What wound ever heals but by degrees? Or, if you prefer something simpler, consider this line from Longfellow. All things come round to him who will but wait. Not entirely true, of course, but still comforting. Milton phrased it more eloquently in They Also Serve, yet Cervantes captured it best. Patience and shuffle the cards. Good advice, Leighton, and it's expressed with a clever twist, as all good advice should be. Now patience is often a last resort, a tactic employed when there's nothing left to do. Still, much like virtue, it sometimes rewards those who practice it, though I admit, generally speaking, it is again like virtue futile. In other words, it rewards only itself. It has been wrapped in many eloquent phrases. It's known as sorrow-slave, and master over transformed ills, along with being the essence of great hearts. Rousseau expressed it well. Patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. But perhaps your legal inclinations lean toward Latin. Superanda omnis fortuna ferendo est, as Virgil said. Horace also shared his thoughts on the matter. "Durham," he exclaimed, "the burden of patience is lighter." "Why in the world is Snitkin taking so long?" Leighton muttered. Almost as soon as he spoke, the door swung open, and the detective handed Quentin the tape measure and string. "And now, Leighton, here comes your reward." Quentin bent down to reposition the large wicker chair to the exact spot it occupied when Clark was shot. It was easy to figure out where it had been, as the impressions of the chair's casters were clearly visible in the plush rug. He then threaded the string through the bullet hole in the back of the chair and asked me to hold one end against the spot where the bullet struck the wainscot. After that, he grabbed the tape measure, extended the string through the hole, and measured a distance of 5 feet and 6 inches from the spot that matched where Clark's forehead would have been while seated. He tied a knot in the string to mark this measurement, pulled it taut, and ensured it stretched in a straight line from the wainscot mark through the hole in the chair to a point 5 feet and 6 inches in front of where Clark's head had rested. "This knot in the string," he explained, "now indicates the exact location of the gun's muzzle that ended Clark's life. You see the logic, don't you? With 2 points along the bullet's path, specifically the hole in the chair and the mark on the wainscot, and knowing the general vertical trajectory of the shot, which was between 5 and 6 feet above the gentleman's head, all we had to do was extend the straight line of the bullet's path to find the exact spot where the shot was fired." "Quite the clever theory," Leighton remarked, "though I can't fathom why you go to such lengths to pinpoint this spot in space." "Not that it matters, since you seem to have ignored the possibility of the bullet's deflection." "Forgive me for disagreeing," Quentin replied with a smile, "but I spoke with Captain Schmidt at length yesterday morning, and he confirmed that there was no deflection of the bullet. Schmidt examined the wound before we arrived, and he was absolutely certain about it. First, the bullet struck the frontal bone at such an angle that deflection was nearly impossible, even if the pistol had been of smaller caliber. Secondly, the gun that shot Clark was a large-bore .45, and the muzzle velocity was so high that the bullet would have traveled in a straight line, even if it had been fired from further away." "And how," Leighton inquired, "did Schmidt know the muzzle velocity?" "I was curious about that myself," Quentin answered. "He explained that the size and characteristics of the bullet and the casing told him everything he needed to know. That's how he recognized it as an Army Colt automatic, what he referred to as a U.S. government Colt, rather than a regular Colt automatic. The weights of the bullets differ slightly. An ordinary Colt bullet weighs 200 grains, while an Army Colt bullet is 230 grains. Schmidt, with his remarkably keen sense of touch, could likely tell the difference right away, though I didn't delve into his physiological abilities. My naturally reserved nature, you see. Nevertheless, he could identify it as a .45 Army Colt automatic bullet. Knowing that, he also knew the muzzle velocity was 809 feet per second, and that the striking energy was 329, which results in a 6-inch penetration in white pine at a distance of 25 yards. An extraordinary fellow, this Schmidt. Can you imagine having so much fascinating knowledge in one's head? The old puzzles of why a man would choose the double bass as his life's work, and where all the pins disappear are mere child's play compared to the question of why someone would spend his life studying the quirks of bullets. "The topic isn't exactly thrilling," Leighton said with a tired sigh. "So, for the sake of argument, let's accept that you've pinpointed the exact moment the gun discharged. What now?" "While I hold the string in a straight line," Quentin instructed, "please measure the distance from the floor to the knot. Then my secret will be revealed." "This isn't exactly captivating for me, either," Leighton protested. "I'd much rather play London Bridge." Yet he went ahead and took the measurement. 4 feet, 8.5 inches, he announced with indifference. Quentin placed a cigarette on the rug directly beneath the knot. "We now know exactly how high the pistol was held when it discharged. I'm sure you understand how we arrived at that conclusion." "It seems pretty straightforward," Leighton replied. Quentin called out to Snitkin waiting by the door. "The district attorney needs to borrow your gun for a moment," he said. "He wants to conduct a test." Snitkin approached Leighton, holding out his pistol with a curious expression. "The safety's on, sir. Should I switch it off?" Leighton hesitated to take the weapon, but Quentin stepped in. That's fine. Mr. Leighton doesn't plan to fire it, I hope. Once Snitkin had departed, Quentin sat in a wicker chair, positioning his head near the bullet hole. Now, Leighton, he said, would you please stand where the murderer stood, holding the gun directly above that cigarette on the floor, and aim deliberately at my left temple. Just be careful, he warned with a charming smile, not to pull the trigger, or you'll never find out who killed Clark. Reluctantly, Leighton complied. As he prepared to aim, Quentin asked me to measure the height of the gun's muzzle from the floor. The distance measured 4 feet and 9 inches. Quite right, he said as he stood up. You see, Leighton, you're 5 feet, 11 inches tall. Therefore, the person who shot Clark was almost exactly your height, certainly not shorter than 5 feet 10. That much is rather obvious, wouldn't you agree? His demonstration was straightforward and clear. Leighton found himself genuinely impressed. His demeanor shifted to seriousness. He studied Quentin for a moment with a thoughtful frown, and then replied, That's all well and good, but the person who fired the shot could have held the pistol a bit higher than I do. That doesn't work, Quentin countered. I've spent enough time shooting to know that when an expert aims deliberately at a small target, he does so with a firm arm and a slightly raised shoulder, to ensure the sight aligns perfectly between his eye and the target. The height at which one holds a revolver, under those conditions, pretty much reflects his own height. So, your argument is based on the assumption that the person who shot Clark was skilled enough to take deliberate aim at a small target. Not an assumption, but a fact, Quentin asserted. Think about it. If the shooter hadn't been an expert, he wouldn't have aimed for the forehead at such close range, but would have gone for a larger target, his chest. And choosing to aim at the forehead means he definitely took careful aim, wouldn't you agree? Besides, if he weren't skilled and had aimed at the chest without focusing, he likely would have fired more than once. Leighton thought it over. I'll admit that your theory sounds reasonable on the surface, he finally conceded. However, the guilty party could have been any height over 5 feet, 10. A man could crouch down quite a bit and still take aim carefully. True, Quentin agreed. But let's not forget that the murderer's position, in this case, was perfectly natural. Otherwise, Clark would have noticed something was off, and he wouldn't have been caught off guard. His surprised posture clearly indicated that he hadn't seen it coming. Of course, the shooter could have bent down slightly without drawing Clark's attention. So, let's say the guilty individual's height ranges somewhere between 5 feet 10 and 6 feet 2. Does that sound about right to you? Leighton fell silent. The charming Miss and Claire, you know, Quentin said with a sly smile, can't be more than 5 feet 5 or 6. Leighton grunted and continued to smoke, lost in thought. This Captain Carter, I assume, Quentin continued, is over 6 feet, right? Leighton narrowed his eyes. What makes you think that? You just told me, didn't you? I told you. Not exactly in those words, Quentin pointed out. But after I laid out the probable height of the murderer, which didn't match that of the young lady you were suspicious of, I could tell your mind was racing for other possibilities. Since the lady's admirer was the only other option in your mind, I figured you were considering the captain. Had he fit the height you believed the murderer to be, you wouldn't have said a word. But when you suggested the murderer might have bent down to take the shot, I took that to mean the captain must be exceptionally tall. So, from the meaningful silence that came from you, my dear friend, it was clear you were revealing that the gentleman stands at least 6 feet tall. I see you've added mind-reading to your talents, Leighton replied. I'm just waiting for you to show off some slate-writing next. His tone was irritated, but it was the annoyance of a man unwilling to let go of his convictions. He felt himself being swayed by Quentin's reasoning, yet he stubbornly clung to his prior beliefs. Surely you don't doubt my assessment of the guilty party's height? Quentin asked smoothly. Not entirely, Leighton admitted. It seems plausible enough. But I can't help but wonder, why didn't Schmidt figure it out, if it was that straightforward? Anaxagoras once said that those in need of a lamp should keep it filled with oil. It's a profound observation, Leighton, one of those seemingly simple sayings that holds a deeper truth. A lamp without oil is useless, you see. The police have plenty of lamps, every kind you can think of, but they lack the oil, so to speak. That's why they only manage to find anyone during broad daylight. Leighton's thoughts shifted in another direction, and he stood up to pace the floor. I hadn't considered Captain Carter as the actual perpetrator of the crime until now. Why didn't you think of him? Was it because one of your detectives claimed he was home, like a good boy, that night? I guess that's part of it. Leighton continued his thoughtful pacing. Then suddenly he spun around. But that's not the whole reason. It was the overwhelming circumstantial evidence against the St. Clair woman. And Quentin, despite your demonstration today, you haven't explained away any of the evidence against her. Where was she between 12 and 1? Why did she go to dinner with Clark? How did her handbag end up here? And what about those burned cigarette butts in the grate? Those cigarette butts are the sticking point. I can't accept that your demonstration fully convinces me, even though it is compelling, as long as I have to deal with that evidence, which is equally persuasive. My word, Quentin exclaimed with a sigh. You're in a positively dreadful predicament. Still, perhaps I can shed some light on those troubling cigarette butts. He went to the door again, called for Snitkin, and returned the pistol. The district attorney appreciates your assistance, he said. And would you be kind enough to fetch Mrs. Platts? We'd like to have a word with her. As he turned back to the room, he smiled at Leighton. This time, I'd like to do all the talking with the lady, if you don't mind. There are aspects of Mrs. Platts that you completely overlooked when you questioned her yesterday. Leighton's interest was piqued, though he remained skeptical. Go ahead, the floor is yours, he replied. Chapter 10. Eliminating a Suspect. Saturday, May 15, 5:30 p.m. When the housekeeper entered, she seemed more composed than when Leighton had first questioned her. There was an air about her that was both sullen and resilient, and she regarded me with a slightly defiant look. Leighton merely nodded in acknowledgement, but Quentin rose from his seat and gestured toward a low, tufted Morris chair near the fireplace, facing the front windows. She perched on the edge of it, resting her elbows on the broad arms. I have some questions for you, Mrs. Platts, Quentin started, locking her with his sharp gaze. And it would be best for everyone if you tell the whole truth. Do you understand? The easy-going, slightly playful demeanor he had adopted with Leighton was gone. He stood before her, serious and unwavering. At his words, she lifted her chin. Her expression was flat, but her mouth was set stubbornly, and a flicker of anxiety glinted in her eyes. Quentin paused for a moment, and then continued, articulating each word clearly. What time did the lady arrive here, on the day Mr. Clark was killed? The woman's gaze didn't waver, but her pupils grew wide. There was no one here. Oh yes, there was, Mrs. Platts. Quentin's voice was steady. What time did she arrive? I'm telling you nobody was here, she insisted. Quentin lit a cigarette with deliberate calm, maintaining his unwavering gaze on her. He continued to smoke slowly until her eyes finally dropped. Then he stepped closer and said firmly, If you tell the truth, no harm will come to you. But if you withhold information, you will find yourself in a world of trouble. Keeping evidence from the authorities is a crime, and the law won't be lenient. He flashed a knowing glance at Leighton, who was observing the exchange with keen interest. The woman now began to display signs of agitation. She pulled in her elbows, her breathing quickening. I swear to you, there wasn't anyone here. A hint of hoarseness betrayed her emotions. Let's not bring guard into this, Quentin replied casually. What time was the lady here? She pressed her lips together defiantly, and for a full minute, silence filled the room. Quentin smoked quietly, while Leighton held his cigar still between his thumb and forefinger, waiting expectantly. Again, Quentin's flat voice asked, What time was she here? The woman clenched her hands in a tense gesture, leaning forward. I tell you, I swear it. Quentin made a dismissive gesture with his hand, and smiled coldly. "This won't work," he said. "You're being foolish. We're here to uncover the truth, and you're going to share it." "I've already told you the truth." "Is it really going to come to the point where the district attorney has to order your detention?" "I've told you the truth," she insisted again. Quentin decisively crushed his cigarette into an ashtray on the table. "All right then, Mrs. Platts. Since you won't tell me about the young woman who visited that afternoon, I'm going to tell you about her." His demeanor was relaxed and cynical, and the woman regarded him warily. "Later in the afternoon on the day your employer was shot, the doorbell rang. Perhaps Mr. Clark had mentioned he was expecting a guest. Anyway, you answered the door and let in a delightful young lady. You showed her into this room, and what do you think, my dear madam? She took that very chair you're sitting in so uncomfortably." He paused, smiling teasingly. "Then," he continued, "you served tea to her and Mr. Clark. After a while she left, and Mr. Clark went upstairs to get ready for dinner. You see, Mrs. Platts, I'm well informed." He lit another cigarette. "Did you take note of the young lady in particular? If not, I can describe her to you. She was on the shorter side, petite, if you will. She had dark hair and dark eyes, and her attire was quite unassuming." A shift had taken place within the woman. Her gaze was fixed, her cheeks had turned a pallid grey, and her breaths were noticeably labored. "Now, Mrs. Platts," Quentin demanded sharply, "what do you have to say?" She inhaled deeply. "There wasn't anyone here," she insisted stubbornly. There was something almost commendable about her defiance. Quentin paused to think. Leighton was about to speak, but seemed to reconsider, opting instead to watch the woman intently. "Your reaction is understandable," Quentin remarked at last. "The young lady was certainly known to you, and you had a personal reason for wanting to keep her presence here a secret." At his words, she straightened up, terror etched on her face. "I've never seen her before," she exclaimed, then suddenly fell silent. "Ah," Quentin replied with an amused smirk. "So you've never met the young lady, is that right? That may very well be true, but it doesn't change the situation. She seems like a lovely girl, even if she did share tea with your employer alone in his home." "Did she tell you she was here?" The woman's voice lacked energy, her previous resolve crumbling into apathy. "Not precisely," Quentin answered, "but it wasn't necessary. I knew without her telling me. When did she arrive, Mrs. Platts?" "About half an hour after Mr. Clark got here from the office. She had finally surrendered all denials and evasions. But he didn't expect her. At least, he didn't mention her coming to me, and he didn't order tea until after she arrived." Leighton leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell me she had been here when I asked you yesterday morning?" The woman glanced around the room, clearly uneasy. "I think," Quentin interjected pleasantly, "that Mrs. Platts was worried you might misjudge the young lady." She eagerly seized upon his words. "Yes, sir, that was it. I was afraid you might think she did something wrong. She seemed like such a quiet, sweet girl." "That was the only reason, sir." "Absolutely," Quentin replied, trying to be reassuring. "But tell me, didn't it surprise you to see such a quiet, sweet-looking young lady smoking cigarettes?" Her apprehension shifted to disbelief. "Well, yes, sir, it did. But she wasn't a bad girl, I could tell that, and a lot of girls smoke these days. They don't think much of it like they used to." "You're right," Quentin said with a nod. "Still, young ladies really shouldn't be tossing their cigarettes into tiled gas log fireplaces, should they?" The woman looked at him with a hint of uncertainty. She thought he might be joking. "Did she really do that?" She leaned closer to peer into the fireplace. "I didn't see any cigarettes there this morning." "No, of course not," Quentin replied. "One of the district attorney's detectives cleaned it up quite thoroughly for you yesterday." She shot Leighton a glance, unsure if Quentin was being serious, but his relaxed demeanor and pleasant voice put her at ease. "Now that we're on the same page, Mrs. Platts," he continued, "was there anything else you noticed when the young lady was here? You would be doing her a great service by sharing, as both the district attorney and I believe she is innocent. She studied Quentin closely, evaluating his sincerity. The results of her scrutiny seemed positive, for her response reflected her honesty. I don't know if it'll help, but when I came in with the toast, Mr. Clark looked like he was arguing with her. She seemed worried about something that was coming up and asked him not to hold her to some promise she'd made. I was only in the room a minute, and I didn't hear much. But just as I was leaving, he laughed and said it was just a bluff, that nothing was going to happen. She paused, waiting anxiously for a response. She seemed to worry that her revelation might end up being harmful rather than helpful to the girl. Was that all? Quentin's tone suggested that the matter wasn't significant. The woman hesitated. That was all I heard, but there was a small blue jewelry box sitting on the table. My goodness, a jewelry box. Do you know whose it was? No, sir, I don't. The lady hadn't brought it, and I've never seen it in the house before. How did you know it was jewelry? When Mr. Clark went upstairs to change, I came in to clear away the tea things, and it was still sitting on the table. Quentin smiled. And you played Pandora and took a look. Right, quite understandable. I would have done the same. He stepped back and bowed politely. That will be all, Mrs. Platts, and you needn't worry about the young lady. She's in no danger. Once she had left us, Leighton leaned forward and shook his cigar at Quentin. Why didn't you tell me you had information about the case that I didn't have? My dear fellow, Quentin raised his eyebrows in protest. What exactly are you referring to? How did you know this St. Clair woman had been here in the afternoon? I didn't, but I suspected it. There were her cigarette butts in the grate, and since I knew she hadn't been here on the night Clark was shot, I figured it was pretty likely she had stopped by earlier in the day. Given that Clark didn't get back from his office until 4, I reasoned that she must have come by some time between then and the time he left for dinner. Just a simple deduction, wouldn't you say? How did you know she wasn't here that night? The psychological elements of the crime left me no doubt. As I told you, no woman committed it, just another of my metaphysical theories, but never mind that. Additionally, yesterday morning I stood at the spot where the murderer stood and lined up my sight along the line of fire, using Clark's head and the mark on the wainscot as my reference points. It became clear to me then, even without any measurements, that the person responsible was quite tall. All right, but how did you know she left here that afternoon before Clark did? Leighton pressed on. How else could she have changed into an evening gown? Honestly, you know women don't go around showing off their necklines in the afternoon. So you think Clark himself brought her gloves and handbag back here that night? Someone did, and it certainly was Miss St. Clair. Okay, Leighton admitted. And what about this Morris chair? How did you know she sat in it? What other chair could she have used if she was going to toss her cigarettes into the fireplace? Women are notoriously bad at aiming, even if they did have a habit of flinging their cigarette stubs across the room. That conclusion is straightforward enough, Leighton acknowledged. But why don't you tell me how you knew she had tea here, unless you were privy to some inside information? I'm honestly embarrassed to explain, but the shameful truth is that I deduced it from the state of that samovar. I noticed yesterday that it had been used and not emptied or wiped down. Leighton nodded, a smirk crossing his face. It seems you've resorted to the lowly legal approach of relying on material clues. That's why I'm blushing so much. Still, psychological deductions alone don't establish facts as they are, but only as they might be. Other factors must be taken into account. In this case, the clues from the samovar merely provided a basis for an assumption or guess to draw out the housekeeper. Well, I can't deny you succeeded, Leighton said, but I'm curious what led you to accuse her of having a personal interest in the girl. That statement clearly showed you had some prior knowledge of the situation. Quentin's expression turned serious. Leighton, I swear to you, he said earnestly, I didn't have anything specific in mind. I made the accusation, assuming it was unfounded just to catch her off guard, and she fell right for it. But, good heavens, it seems I really hit the mark, didn't I? I can't for the life of me figure out why she was scared, but honestly, it really doesn't matter. Maybe not, Leighton replied, though there was uncertainty in his voice. What do you make of the jewelry box and the argument between Clark and the girl? Not much yet. They just don't seem to fit, do they? He paused for a moment, then spoke with unusual seriousness. Leighton, seriously, don't waste your time on these side matters. I'm telling you, the girl had nothing to do with the murder. Leave her alone. You'll thank yourself later if you do. Leighton sat there scowling, staring off into space. I'm convinced you think you know something. Cogito ergo sum, Quentin murmured. You know, I've always found Descartes' philosophy intriguing. It was a break from universal skepticism and a search for real knowledge through self-awareness. Spinoza in his pantheism and Berkeley in his idealism missed the point of their predecessors' famous principle. Even Descartes' mistakes were insightful. His way of reasoning, despite its scientific flaws, gave new meaning to the symbols that analysts use. After all, the mind, to work well, has to blend the precision of natural science with the lofty speculations of astronomy. Take Descartes' theory of vortices, for example. Oh, just be quiet, Leighton snapped. I'm not asking you to share your precious secrets, so why are you burdening me with a lecture on 17th-century philosophy? Anyway, you have to admit, Quentin said lightly, that by eliminating those troubling cigarette butts, so to speak, I've cleared Miss St. Clair as a suspect. Leighton didn't respond immediately. It was clear that everything that had happened in the past hour had made a strong impression on him. He didn't underestimate Quentin, despite his constant disagreements, and he knew that beneath Quentin's light-hearted demeanor was a serious nature. Moreover, Leighton had a great sense of justice. He wasn't narrow-minded, even if he could be stubborn at times. I had never seen him close his mind to the possibility of the truth, no matter how much it clashed with his own beliefs. It didn't surprise me at all when he finally looked up, a gracious smile surrendering any previous tension. You've made your point, he said. I accept it with the humility it deserves. I'm truly grateful to you. Quentin, seemingly uninterested, wandered over to the window and gazed outside. I'm glad to see that you can accept evidence that the human mind simply can't ignore. I had always noticed that in their interactions, whenever one man made a remark that hinted at generosity, the other would respond in a way that dismissed any outward show of sentiment. It was as if they wanted to keep this more personal aspect of their friendship hidden from the world. Consequently, Leighton ignored Quentin's jab. Do you happen to have any enlightening suggestions, beyond the negative ones, regarding Clark's murderer? He asked. Absolutely, Quentin replied. I have plenty of suggestions. Care to share a good one? Leighton mimicked Quentin's light-hearted tone. Quentin seemed to ponder for a moment. Well, I'd recommend starting with a tall man, cool-headed, skilled with firearms, a crack shot, and someone who was fairly well known to the deceased. He would need to be aware that Clark was going to dinner with Miss St. Clair, or at least have reason to suspect it. Leighton studied Quentin closely for several moments. I think I get it. Not a bad theory, either. You know, I'm going to suggest to Forrest that he looks into Captain Carter's activities on the night of the murder. Oh, absolutely, Quentin said indifferently as he strolled over to the piano. Leighton watched him, puzzled, ready to speak, when Quentin began playing a lively French café tune that starts, if I'm not mistaken, with Ils sont dans les vins les moines. Chapter 11. Motive and a Threat. Sunday, May 16, afternoon. The next day, Sunday, we had lunch with Leighton at the Stuyvesant Club. Quentin had proposed the meeting the night before, explaining to me that he wanted to be there in case Leander Brady arrived from Long Island. It fascinates me how people insist on complicating the simplest of matters, he said. They seem to have a genuine aversion to anything straightforward and uncomplicated. The entire modern commercial system is a giant contraption designed to make things as convoluted as possible. When you buy something for 10 cents at a department store today, a complete record of the transaction is created in triplicate, approved by numerous floor managers and clerks, signed and re-signed, logged into countless ledgers with various ink colors, and then carefully locked away in steel filing cabinets. And if that weren't enough, our business leaders have added a whole costly army of efficiency experts whose sole job is to throw more confusion into this already messy process. It's the same with everything else in modern life. Take that ridiculous obsession called golf. It's just hitting a ball into a hole with a stick. Yet its fans have created an elaborate uniform to wear while playing it. They spend decades perfecting the angle of their feet and the exact way to grip the club. Plus, to discuss the so-called intricacies of this silly sport, they've come up with a strange vocabulary that would be baffling even to a learned scholar. He gestured with disdain at a stack of Sunday newspapers. Then there's the Clark murder, a simple and trivial case. Yet the entire legal system is running full steam, causing chaos in the community when it could be resolved quietly in 5 minutes with some clear thinking. However, during lunch, he didn't bring up the crime, and as if by unspoken agreement, we steered clear of the topic. Leighton had casually mentioned to us, as we headed into the dining room, that he was expecting Forrest to arrive shortly. The sergeant was already waiting for us when we made our way to the lounge for a smoke, and his expression showed he was not happy with how things were unfolding. "I told you, Mr. Leighton," he said as he pulled up a chair, "this case is going to be a tough one. Did you manage to get anything useful from the St. Clair woman?" Leighton shook his head. "She's out of it." He briefly recounted the events at Clark's house the day before. "Well, if you're satisfied," Forrest replied, sounding a bit skeptical, "that's good enough for me. But what about Captain Carter?" "That's what I wanted to discuss with you," Leighton replied. "There's no direct evidence against him, but there are several suspicious details that could link him to the murder. He fits the height description, and we shouldn't overlook the fact that Clark was shot with a gun similar to one Carter would likely own. He was engaged to the girl, so a motive could stem from Clark's attention toward her. And ever since the big fight," Forrest added, "these army boys don't think twice about shooting folks. They got used to bloodshed on the battlefield." "The only issue," Leighton continued, "is that Phelps, who was assigned to investigate the captain, informed me that Carter was home that night from 8 o'clock onward. Of course, there could be a loophole somewhere, and I was thinking you might want to have one of your men dig deeper into this and figure out what's really happening. Phelps got his information from one of the hall boys, so it might be a good idea to find that boy again and apply a little pressure. If it turned out that Carter wasn't home at 12:30 that night, we might finally have the lead you've been searching for." "I'll handle it myself," Forrest said. "I'll head over there tonight, and if that boy knows anything, he'll spill it before I'm done with him." We had only been chatting a few more minutes when a uniformed attendant approached the district attorney and announced that Mr. Brady was here. Leighton asked for his visitor to be shown into the lounge, then turned to Forrest. "You should stay and listen to what he has to say." Leander Brady was the very picture of elegance. He walked with an exaggerated grace, taking small, deliberate steps as if admiring himself. His long, thin legs, with knees that seemed to turn slightly inward, supported a short, protruding torso, and his chest bloomed out in a proud curve, reminiscent of a plump pigeon. His round face was framed by jowls that hung over a collar far too snug. His thin, blonde hair was slicked back neatly, and the tips of his narrow moustache were waxed to sharp points. He wore light grey summer flannels paired with a pale turquoise-green silk shirt, a bright foulard tie, and grey suede Oxfords. A strong scent of exotic perfume wafted from the carefully arranged batiste handkerchief in his breast pocket. He greeted Leighton with a syrupy charm and acknowledged us with a condescending nod. After settling into a chair the attendant had placed for him, he began to polish his gold-rimmed eyeglass, which hung from a ribbon, and fixed Leighton with a mournful look. "A truly sad occasion," he sighed. "Given your friendship with Mr. Clark, Leighton replied. "I regret that I must reach out to you at this time. It was very kind of you to come to the city today." Brady waved a hand dismissively with his perfectly manicured fingers. He explained, with a self-satisfied air, that he was more than willing to go out of his way to assist public servants. It was a troubling necessity, no doubt, but his demeanor clearly showed that he understood the responsibilities that came with the noble obligation, and he was ready to fulfill them. He looked at Leighton with a self-satisfied expression, his eyebrows silently inquiring, "What can I do for you?" even though his lips remained still. "I heard from Major Anthony Clark," Leighton began, "that you were very close to his brother. You might be able to share something about his personal life or relationships that could guide our investigation." Brady cast a sorrowful gaze at the floor. "Yes, Julian and I were quite close. We were, in fact, the best of friends. You can't imagine how heartbroken I was to learn of that dear fellow's tragic demise. He seemed like a modern-day version of Aeneas lamenting for Achates, and I was truly saddened that I couldn't rush to New Cornwall to offer my support to those in need." "I'm sure that would have been comforting to his other friends," Quentin remarked with cool politeness. "But under the circumstances, you will be forgiven." Brady blinked, filled with regret. "Oh, but I shall never forgive myself, though I can't say I'm entirely to blame. Just the day before the tragedy, I was heading out on a trip to the Catskills. I had even invited dear Julian to join me, but he was too busy." Brady shook his head, as if mourning the cruel irony of life. How much better, oh, how infinitely better, if only— "You were away for a very short time," Leighton pointed out, interrupting what seemed to be turning into a sermon on the whims of fate. "True," Brady admitted with a wave of his hand, "but I experienced a most unfortunate mishap." He polished his eyeglass for a moment. "My car broke down, and I had to turn back." "What route did you take?" Forrest inquired. Brady delicately adjusted his eyeglass and regarded the sergeant with a hint of boredom. "My advice, mister," Sneed. "Forrest," the other corrected with a touch of annoyance. "Oh, yes, Forrest. My advice, Mr. Forrest. If you're considering a road trip to the Catskills, make sure to get a map from the Automobile Club of America. My chosen route might not be the best fit for you." He turned back to the district attorney with a demeanor that suggested he felt more comfortable speaking with someone on his level. "Tell me, Mr. Brady," Leighton asked, "did Mr. Clark have any enemies?" Brady seemed to ponder the question for a moment. "No, not really. I wouldn't say he had anyone who would actually go so far as to kill him out of hate." "Yet you suggest he had enemies. Could you shed some light on that?" Brady ran his hand thoughtfully over the tips of his golden mustache and let his finger rest on his cheek, considering his words. "Your request, Mr. Leighton," he said with obvious reluctance, "brings up a topic I hesitate to discuss, but perhaps it's best I confide in you man to man. Julian, like many fine gentlemen, had, how shall I say it, a weakness for women." He looked at Leighton, seeking approval for his delicate way of putting an awkward truth. "You see," he continued in response to Leighton's understanding nod, "Julian didn't have the kind of looks that women generally find appealing." It was clear that Brady thought he was quite different from Clark in this regard. Julian was aware of his shortcomings, and unfortunately, if you'll pardon me for mentioning it, this led him to use certain tactics in his interactions with women that you and I would never consider. Truth be told, though it bothers me to say it, he often took unfair advantage of them, employing rather sneaky methods. He paused, appearing distressed by this serious flaw in his friend, as well as by the fact that he had to make such an unflattering admission. "Was it one of these women whom Clark treated unfairly that you're referring to?" Leighton asked. "No, not the woman herself," Brady replied, "but rather a man who was interested in her. Indeed, this man issued a threat against Julian's life. You can understand why I hesitated to share this. However, I must emphasize that the threat was made quite openly. Several others besides myself were present to hear it." Well, that certainly clears you of any breach of confidence, Leighton remarked. Brady acknowledged this with a slight nod. It occurred at a small gathering where I was the unwitting host, he admitted with a hint of humility. Who was the man? Leighton asked, his tone polite yet firm. You'll understand my hesitation, Brady began. Then, with a sense of justified honesty, he leaned in closer. Withholding the gentleman's name would be unjust to Julian. It was Captain Philip Carter. He exhaled deeply, allowing himself a moment of reflection. I hope you won't press me for the lady's name. That won't be necessary, Leighton replied, but I would appreciate it if you could share a bit more about the incident. Brady obliged, his expression one of resigned acceptance. Julian was quite taken with the lady, showering her with attention that, I must admit, was not well received. Captain Carter was not pleased with these advances, and during the gathering I had invited him and Julian to, some rather unpleasant, and if I'm honest, coarse words were exchanged. I fear the wine had flowed a bit too freely, for Julian was always the epitome of decorum. He truly excelled in the art of social interaction. In a fit of anger, the captain warned Julian that unless he backed off from the lady entirely, he would pay for it with his life. The captain even had the audacity to draw his revolver halfway out of his pocket. Was it a revolver or an automatic pistol? Forrest inquired. Brady cast a slight, annoyed smile at the district attorney, barely sparing a glance at the sergeant. I misspoke. Forgive me. It was not a revolver. It was, I believe, an automatic army pistol, though, as you can imagine, I didn't see it fully. You say others witnessed the altercation. Several of my guests were nearby, Brady explained, but honestly I couldn't name them. The truth is, I didn't think much of the threat. Actually, it had completely slipped my mind until I read about poor Julian's death. At that moment, I recalled the unfortunate incident and thought to myself, why not inform the district attorney? Thoughts that breathe and words that burn, murmured Quentin, who had been sitting through the interview in unbearable boredom. Brady once again adjusted his eyeglass and shot a glare at Quentin. I beg your pardon, sir. Quentin smiled disarmingly. Just a quote from Gray. Poetry catches my interest in certain moods, you know. Do you happen to know Colonel Driscoll? Brady regarded him coolly, but only met a blank expression in return. I'm acquainted with the gentleman, he replied, with a touch of pride. Was Colonel Driscoll present at this entertaining little gathering of yours? Quentin's tone was innocently curious. Now that you mention it, I believe he was, Brady admitted, raising his eyebrows in intrigue. But Quentin was back to staring disinterestedly out the window. Leighton, frustrated by the interruption, tried to steer the conversation back to a more pleasant and practical line of questioning. Yet Brady, though talkative, had little else to offer. He consistently redirected the conversation to Captain Carter, and despite his eloquent denials, it was clear he placed more importance on the threat than he was willing to admit. Leighton probed for nearly an hour, but couldn't uncover anything else of significance. When Brady stood to leave, Quentin turned from his contemplation of the outside world, and bowing politely, allowed his gaze to rest on Brady with genuine goodwill. Now that you're in New Cornwall, Mr. Brady, though unfortunate in arriving late, I trust you will stay until the investigation concludes. Brady's usual calm demeanor shifted to one of thinly veiled surprise. I hadn't planned on that. It would be highly beneficial if you could make it happen, Leighton insisted, though I suspect he wouldn't have made the request had Quentin not brought it up first. Brady paused for a moment, then waved his hand in a gesture of graceful capitulation. Of course I'll stay. Whenever you require my assistance further, you can find me at the Ansonia. His words dripped with an air of self-importance, and he bestowed upon Leighton a parting smile that felt more like a mask than a genuine expression of warmth. It seemed as though an invisible sculptor had carefully placed it there, moving only the muscles of his mouth. Once he left, Quentin shot Leighton a look filled with suppressed laughter. Elegance, ease, and golden rhythm. But don't be fooled by the poetry, old friend. Our polished friend is nothing but a master of deceit. If you're implying that he's a smooth talker, Forrest interjected, I can't agree. I think the story regarding the captain's threat is solid. Oh, yes, that part is true. And you know, Leighton, the gallant Mr. Brady was quite disappointed when you didn't press him to disclose Miss St. Clair's name. This so-called Leander, I fear, would never have crossed the Hellespont for a lady. Be he a swimmer or not, Forrest said impatiently, he's provided us with something to work with. Leighton acknowledged that Brady's account had significantly strengthened the case against Carter. I think I'll invite the captain to my office tomorrow for questioning, he said. Just then, Major Clark walked into the room, and Leighton welcomed him to join us. I just saw Brady hail a taxi, he remarked as he settled in. I take it you've been discussing Julian's matters with him. Did he help you at all? I hope so, for all our sakes, Leighton replied kindly. By the way, Major, what do you know about a Captain Philip Carter? Major Clark looked at Leighton, surprise evident in his expression. You didn't know. Carter was one of the captains in my regiment, a top-notch man. He knew Julian fairly well, I believe, but my impression is they weren't particularly close friends. Surely you're not suggesting he's connected to this incident? Leighton chose not to answer directly. Did you attend one of Brady's parties, the night the captain threatened your brother? I seem to recall going to one or two of Brady's gatherings, the Major said. I don't usually care for such events, but Julian convinced me it was good for business. He lifted his gaze, frowning as if he were trying to recall a distant memory. However, I can't remember, by George. Yes, I think I do, but if what I'm thinking of is what you mean, you can dismiss it. We were all a bit tipsy that night. Did Captain Carter draw a gun? Forrest asked. The Major pursed his lips. Now that you mention it, I think he did make some kind of gesture like that. Did you see the gun? Forrest pressed. No, I can't say that I did. Leighton posed the next question. Do you believe Captain Carter is capable of murder? Hardly, Major Clark said emphatically. Carter isn't cold-blooded. The woman involved in the argument is more likely to commit such an act than he is. A brief silence ensued, broken by Quentin. What do you know, Major, about this fashion plate Brady? He seems quite the character. Does he have a history, or is his existence merely his own biography? Leander Brady, the Major replied, is a prime example of the modern idle rich. I say modern, though I suspect he's around 40. He was spoiled in his upbringing, had everything he wanted, I believe, but he grew restless and chased after various fads until he tired of them. He spent 2 years in South Africa hunting big game, and as far as I know, wrote a book about his experiences. Since then, he hasn't done much of anything. He married a wealthy woman a few years back, probably for her money, but her father controls the finances and keeps him on a tight budget. Brady's a slacker and a loafer, yet Julian seemed to be drawn to him somehow. The Major spoke casually, as if discussing a mundane topic, but I think we all sensed his strong dislike for Brady. Not exactly a charming personality, is he? Quentin remarked, and he douses himself in jicky like it's going out of style. True, Forrest added, looking thoughtful, but you have to give some credit. It takes real guts to go after big game. And speaking of guts, I've been thinking the guy who shot your brother, Major, had nerves of steel. He did it right in front of him while his man was fully aware, and with a servant in the house. That's not easy. Sergeant, you're positively brilliant, Quentin exclaimed. Chapter 12. The owner of a colt, .45. Monday, May 17, morning. Quentin and I arrived at the district attorney's office shortly after 9 the next morning, only to find Captain Philip Carter had been waiting for 20 minutes. Leighton instructed Blake to bring him in immediately. Captain Carter stood tall, over 6'2", with a clean-shaven face, straight posture, and a slender build. His expression was serious, and he stood before the district attorney like a soldier awaiting commands from a superior. "Please take a seat, Captain," Leighton said, bowing slightly. "I've asked you here, as you likely know, to ask a few questions about Mr. Julian Clark. I need you to clarify several points concerning your relationship with him." "Am I being suspected of involvement in the crime?" Carter replied, his southern accent lightly discernible. "That's what we're here to find out," Leighton responded coldly. "I need to ask you a few questions to clarify that." Carter sat stiffly in his chair, waiting patiently. Leighton's gaze was unwavering. "I understand you recently made a threat against Mr. Julian Clark's life." Carter flinched, his fingers gripping his knees tightly. Before he could respond, Leighton continued. "I can tell you the context of that threat. It was made at a party hosted by Mr. Leander Brady." Carter paused, then squared his jaw. "Fine, I admit I made that threat. Clark was a scoundrel. He had it coming. That night he was more insufferable than usual. He'd been drinking too much, and I suppose I had as well." He offered a twisted smile, looking nervously past the district attorney out the window. "But I didn't shoot him, sir. I didn't even realize he had been shot until I read the newspaper the next day. He was shot with an army Colt, the type you men carried during the war," Leighton said, keeping a steady gaze on him. "I know that," Carter replied. "The papers mentioned it." "You own such a gun, don't you, Captain?" The other hesitated again. "No, sir." His voice was barely above a whisper. "What happened to it?" Carter glanced at Leighton, then quickly averted his eyes. I lost it in France." Leighton gave a faint smile. "Then how do you explain that Mr. Brady saw the gun on the night you made your threat?" "Saw the gun?" Carter stared blankly at the district attorney. "Yes, he saw it and identified it as an army gun," Leighton pressed calmly. "Moreover, Major Clark saw you make a gesture as if you were about to draw a weapon." Carter inhaled deeply and set his mouth in a firm line. "I swear to you, sir, I don't have a gun. I lost it in France." "Maybe you didn't lose it, Captain. Perhaps you lent it to someone." "I didn't, sir," the words erupted from him. "Think for a moment, Captain. Is it possible you lent it to someone?" "No, I absolutely did not." "You visited Riverside Drive yesterday. Maybe you took it with you." Quentin had been listening intently. "Oh, very clever," he whispered in my ear. Captain Carter shifted uneasily. His face, though tanned, seemed to lose color, and he tried to avoid the unwavering stare of his interrogator by focusing on something on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice, which had been defiant, now carried a hint of anxiety. "I didn't have it with me, and I didn't lend it to anyone." Leighton leaned forward over the desk, resting his chin on his hand, like a stern statue. "You may have lent it to someone before that morning." "Before?" Carter looked up suddenly, pausing as if weighing the implications of Leighton's words. Leighton seized on his confusion. "Have you lent your gun to anyone since you returned from France?" "No, I've never lent it," he began, but suddenly stopped and blushed. Then he quickly added, "How could I lend it? I just told you, sir." "Forget that," Leighton interrupted. "So you had a gun, did you, Captain? Do you still have it?" Carter opened his mouth to respond, but then shut it tight. Leighton relaxed and leaned back in his chair. "You knew, of course, that Clark had been bothering Miss St. Clair with his advances." At the mention of the girl, the captain stiffened. His face turned a deep shade of red, and he glared at the district attorney. After a slow, deep breath, he spoke through clenched teeth. "Let's leave Miss St. Clair out of this." He looked ready to pounce on Leighton. "Unfortunately, we can't." Leighton's tone was sympathetic, but firm. "Too many facts link her to the case. For instance, her handbag was found in Clark's living room the morning after the murder." "That's a lie, sir." Leighton brushed off the insult. "Miss St. Clair herself acknowledges the situation." He raised his hand as the other was about to retort. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not accusing Miss St. Clair of any wrongdoing. I'm just trying to understand your connection to this. The captain scrutinized Leighton, his expression revealing his skepticism. Finally, he set his jaw and declared with resolve, "I have nothing more to say on the matter, sir." "You were aware, weren't you," Leighton pressed on, "that Miss St. Clair had dinner with Clark at the Marseille the night he was shot?" "What of it?" Carter replied sullenly. "And you knew, didn't you, that they left the restaurant at midnight, and that Miss St. Clair didn't get home until after 1? A strange look crossed the man's face. The muscles in his neck tightened, and he took a deep, steady breath. But he neither looked at the district attorney nor spoke. "You know, of course," continued Leighton in his flat tone, "that Clark was shot at 12:30. He paused, and for a full minute the room was silent. "Do you have nothing else to say, Captain?" he finally asked. "No further explanations to offer?" Carter remained silent, staring straight ahead, clearly having made up his mind to say nothing. Leighton stood up. "In that case, let us consider this interview finished." As soon as Captain Carter left, Leighton called for one of his clerks. "Tell Ben to follow that man. Find out where he goes and what he does. I want a report at the Stuyvesant Club tonight." Once we were alone, Quentin shot Leighton a teasing but admiring glance. "Very clever, almost crafty. But you know, your questions about the lady were terribly inappropriate." "Indeed," Leighton agreed. "But it seems we might be on the right track. Carter didn't come across as someone truly innocent." "Did he?" Quentin replied. "What exactly gave away his supposed guilt?" "You saw him go pale when I asked him about the weapon. He was clearly on edge, actually afraid." Quentin sighed. "You have quite the collection of ready-made ideas, Leighton. Don't you realize that an innocent person under suspicion often appears more nervous than a guilty one, who, after all, had the guts to commit the crime and knows that any sign of fear is seen as a confession by you lawyers? My strength is as the strength of 10 because my heart is pure. That's just a Sunday school saying. Touch nearly any innocent man on the shoulder and say, 'You're under arrest,' and his eyes will widen, he'll break into a cold sweat, the color will drain from his face, and he'll be trembling and gasping for breath. If he's prone to hysteria or has heart issues, he might even collapse entirely. It's the guilty person who, when confronted, raises their eyebrows in feigned surprise and says, 'You can't be serious. Here, have a cigar.' A hardened criminal might behave that way," Leighton acknowledged, "but a truly innocent man doesn't crumble, even when faced with accusations." Quentin shook his head, feeling defeated. "My dear friend, Kryl and Voronov might as well have lived without purpose for all the difference it makes to you. Reactions of fear stem from hormonal responses, nothing more. They only indicate that a person's thyroid is underdeveloped or that their adrenal glands are not functioning properly. A man accused of a crime or shown the bloody weapon used will either maintain a calm demeanor, scream, have a fit, faint, or appear indifferent, depending on his hormones, regardless of his guilt. Your theory, you see, would hold up only if everyone had the same levels of internal secretions. But they don't. Honestly, you shouldn't send a man to the electric chair just because he has hormonal deficiencies. It isn't fair play." Before Leighton could respond, Blake appeared at the door, announcing that Forrest had arrived. The sergeant, beaming with satisfaction, burst into the room, forgetting to shake hands for once. "Well, it seems we've found something promising. I visited Captain Carter's apartment building last night, and here's the scoop. Carter was home on the night of the 13th, but just after midnight he stepped out. Listen to this. He didn't return until about 1:15. "What about the Hall boy's original story?" Leighton inquired. "That's where it gets interesting. Carter had the boy bribed, gave him cash to say he never left the house that night. What do you think of that, Mr. Leighton? Pretty crude, wouldn't you say? The kid became chatty once I mentioned I was considering sending him down for doing the job himself." Forrest laughed darkly. "And he won't say a word to Carter either." Leighton nodded slowly. "What you've shared with me, Sergeant, supports some conclusions I reached during my conversation with Captain Carter this morning. Ben set a man to follow him when he left here, and I'm supposed to get a report tonight. Tomorrow could bring this to a resolution. I'll reach out to you in the morning, and if there's anything to be done, you understand that you'll take care of it. Once Forrest had gone, Leighton folded his hands behind his head and leaned back with satisfaction. I think I've figured it out, he said. The girl had dinner with Clark and went back to his place afterward. The captain, suspecting this, went out, found her there, and shot Clark. That explains her gloves and handbag, as well as why it took her an hour to get home from the Marseille. It also clarifies her behavior here on Saturday and the captain's lies about the gun. There you have it. I believe I have my case. The collapse of the captain's alibi seals it. Oh, absolutely, Quentin replied breezily. Hope springs eternal on triumphant wings. Leighton studied him for a moment. Have you completely abandoned reason as a way to reach a conclusion? We have a clear threat, a motive, the time, the place, the opportunity, the behavior, and the criminal agent. Those words sound oddly familiar, Quentin smiled. Didn't most of them apply to the young lady too? And you still haven't identified the criminal agent, you know. But I suppose it's wandering around the city somewhere, just a minor detail. I may not have it right in front of me, Leighton shot back, but with a good man watching at all times, Carter won't have much chance to get rid of the weapon. Quentin shrugged casually. Either way, proceed with caution, he advised. In my humble opinion, you've only stumbled upon a conspiracy. A conspiracy? Good heavens, what kind? A conspiracy of circumstances, if you catch my drift. Well, I'm glad, at least, it doesn't involve international politics, Leighton replied good-naturedly. He glanced at the clock. Do you mind if I get to work? I have a dozen things to take care of and a couple of committees to meet with. Why don't you head across the hall and have a chat with Ben Hanlon? Come back at 12:30, and we'll have lunch together at the Bankers Club. Ben's the top expert on foreign extradition and has spent most of his life tracking down fugitives. He'll have some great stories to share. How absolutely fascinating, Quentin exclaimed, stifling a yawn. But rather than take the suggestion, he strolled over to the window and lit a cigarette. He stood there for a while, puffing on it, rolling it between his fingers and inspecting it critically. You know, Leighton, he remarked, everything's falling apart these days. It's this ridiculous democracy. Even the nobility is going downhill. Take these ragey cigarettes, they've really declined. There was a time when no respectable leader would smoke such inferior tobacco. Leighton smiled. What favor are you trying to ask? Favor? What does that have to do with the decline of Europe's aristocracy? I've noticed that whenever you want to ask for something that feels improper, you start by trashing royalty. Sharp observer, Quentin replied dryly. Then he smiled too. Do you mind if I invite Colonel Driscoll to lunch? Leighton shot him a look. Bigsby Driscoll, you mean? Is he the mysterious colonel you've been asking about for the last couple of days? That's the one, pompous fool and all that. He might be enlightening, though. He's sort of the father figure of Clark's group, knows everyone. A real old gossip. Bring him along if you like, Leighton agreed, then picked up the phone. I'll let Ben know you're coming over for an hour or so.